Alrighty, folks, we're going to have a conversation with the CEO of Steadily about just the things that have happened during his real estate ownership. He is a landlord himself, and there's always things that go right and wrong. And of course, Steadily is the platform. If you want to go get an insurance quote, you want to see what maybe insurance would cost you. It's something that you can work with Steadily on. But we're going to just talk about running a business, and insurance is a part of that. Darren, what are some things that has happened to you over the last 6 years of owning real estate?
The very first property I bought was in Chicago, right off of Fullerton Street. And I was a complete newbie coming into real estate for the first time. And everything bad that you can imagine has happened to that property.
Oh no.
So in Chicago a few years ago, there were protests,
Mhm.
and I was kind of watching them from afar. I live in Texas, kind of wondering what was going on. And then after 4 months, I was looking at my statements from my property manager, and I noticed that my rental income had fallen to zero, and I hadn't gotten a call from him or anything. So I called him and nobody picked up.
Oh
So I
no.
called him again and nobody picked up. And then a day later, he was like, "Hey man, I really feel bad about this, but your property was vandalized during the protest 4 months ago. And there's graffiti all over it. And I felt really bad and I didn't want to tell you. And all of the tenants moved out." And I was just shocked. Like I couldn't believe it. I was like, "You had one job, which
One
was to
job.
tell me that
Yeah.
this thing had happened, and you didn't tell me." And that was just the beginning. We can go on,
Yeah.
but that was my first rude awakening that real estate investing can be very rewarding, but it's not easy. And when people say that it's passive investing, even when you have a full-time property manager, it is anything but passive.
No, I agree with that. It's funny. My first property, I actually wrote about it in my book. We did everything right, and unfortunately, the couple got it, separated and ultimately got a divorce after they moved in, and the husband didn't was not happy with the situation, and stopped paying rent, stopped working, and just went on a bender and destroyed the property. And it took. I'm in California, so it took 3 months to get him out and $1,000. So, yeah, it's anything but passive. Certainly in the beginning, it really hurts. I mean, I had a $15,000 repair bill, after it was already repaired the first time. So, anything but passive is right.
What
And
did
actually,
you I was going to ask you, when these bad things happen, does it change your MO moving forward in any way, or is it just, well, these things happen and there's nothing you can do to prevent it, and you just try to roll with the punches?
well, so you have to ask yourself, well, let's just ask. So first and foremost, on this property, I was ready to quit. I was ready to quit. I had come to real estate after losing 80% of my net worth in the stock market. So I was already defeated. So I was ready to give up. Didn't know the city, blah, blah, blah. I was ready to get up. My wife was like, hey, let's try one more time. So shout out Olivia for doing that. But over time, what I've come to realize is when bad stuff happens, it's a learning responsibility. My job as the owner, even if it's not my fault, is to take extreme ownership and own it. There's a lesson there, and it's my job to find the lesson. So yeah, you have to learn from every mistake, and and by mistake, it could be vacancy longer, it could be somebody double dipping on an expense. Um, they're all just lesson opportunities. So no, I don't just roll with the punches. I'm like, that hurt. What's the lesson in that pain? So I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
For me, it was trust but verify, and I mean that broadly. I had a professional
Mm,
that I trusted to do the job, but I abdicated my responsibility as an owner to be in there once a month saying, "Hey, what was my rental income? What's the occupancy of this property? Let me get someone else other than this guy, maybe once a quarter, once every 6 months, to do a drive by, and just a friend, and say, hey, here's what I see at the property," something to verify, because I just checked out and I said, "Oh,
yeah.
I'm paying him his 9% and he'll take care of it." That's what resulted in the loss. And so it changed the way that I interact with my PMs on my other properties now, where I trust them to a certain extent, but
Mhm.
I'm looking to verify that the expense that they're submitting, that the rents, that the occupancy, that the upkeep of the property is what they say it is.
Yeah, we've put in systems. now today, Olivia and I get a daily report of our portfolios, and we have a weekly call, 15 minutes. We probably make 3 out of the month just to check in on this, that, the other. You have to, it's your money, right? It's your asset. And if you're paying somebody like I'm paying them, you know, they have to, they have to march to my drum. And the other thing you don't know this, my audience hopefully does, is I fired the first 5 PMs when we had a small portfolio. And that's hard, right? You're in another state. I might as well have been in another state. I fired these folks when I was in different countries. And it's hard, right? Talk about feeling helpless, right? You have 2, 3, 4 homes. You're firing someone because they lied or stole from you, or underperformed in some other way, and you're switching. It's it's so helpless until the new one really gets in there. So yeah, trust but verify is the right answer.
I'm curious. So something else went bad on the same property, and before this, yeah, I paint the picture that this property is a lemon. It's not. It's an $850,000 like nice three unit apartment
Wow.
on a great street in Chicago, but it's also incredibly unlucky. So I've had the property now for 6 years, and I decided, hey, I want to exit the property, and so I get all the tenants moved out and get it cleaned up, professional photos taken, get it listed.
Hmm.
I think I listed it too high, so it didn't immediately sell. And then about 45 days in, I get a text from one of the agents that had toured the property and said, hey, I think somebody's living in one of your units. And
Oh, squatter.
I'm like, what? And so I'm 2,000 miles away.
Right.
So I call up my listing agent and I'm like, hey, can you go out there and see if there's anybody there? And he goes out and it's like, oh, I don't see anybody. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of like I'm like, no, pass it off. And then sure enough, like a week later, another person's like, no, there's definitely somebody in there. So
Right.
then I have to plan a day when I can, I have a full-time busy job when I
Right.
can on a weekend when I can get up there and fly out there, end up standing outside the property for 4 hours waiting for the police to come. They go in, and then as I'm waiting outside to see like what happens, all of a sudden 6 other police cars roll up, and I'm like, oh, there really
Yeah.
is somebody in there. And so they march out 3 guys from the property. And when they
Wow.
finally let me into the building, they had gone through and it looked like they had been trying to make polka dots on the walls with a hammer. So throughout the entire apartment, there were just holes every foot all over the walls with a hammer, um, burn marks on the ground. Like I couldn't figure out what the motivation was. Maybe it was to find the copper pipes, etc. But all told, $20,000 worth of damage to the property, and because the property had been vacant for more than 45 days, not covered by insurance.
It's funny. It's not funny, but people that know my story. I have 2 horrible stories. The first one was that first property on Norris Drive, but the other one's one of my apartment buildings. They had a hammer party at one of my units. Kind of the same thing. So basically, the long story short is somebody came to pay rent. They weren't on the lease. We asked them to get on the lease. Everything they told us was a lie. They tried to pay rent. We said no, no, no. Turns out this guy was subleasing from the original tenant. The original tenant had, I don't know, left somewhere, but he wasn't qualified. And we started evictions, and he
Mhm.
didn't like that. And we actually got proof of this because they went to jail, and he sent a note out to all his buddies, big rager tonight, bring a hammer. And there was like 5 or 6 people in there just beating on the walls on purpose, you know. And again, it's an apartment building, so there's neighbors, right? So it was a big to do, and police came, and I think 3 or 4 people went to jail, and yeah, it was nasty. That was 20 grand. That was 20 grand. That fix, not good.
So the what takeaways would, if I were coming to you back in 2018
Hmm.
without these battle scars, and I said, Michael, I'm buying this rental property for the first time.
Hmm.
Tell me tell me what I can do to try. Some bad things are just going to happen. What can I
Yeah,
do to reduce my odds of something bad happening by 50%?
yeah. The thing that I tell all new investors, because a lot of people want to go out of state, is they always talk about your core 4, right? Real estate agent, lender, all these things. I actually think there's a fifth, and that who's going to be the boots on the ground for you? Because you already said it. The right answer is you have to have somebody you don't pay drive by the property every once in a while. And because they're going to tell you the truth, they're not incented to tell you a story. So I always tell people to find a local investor because they're going to know the area, they're going to know teams, they're going to tell you this, that, the other. So I would invest time in the beginnings getting to know other local investors in Chicago, in your case, likely in that neighborhood. They have local meetups. They have probably, in 18, they probably still had virtual meetups as well. But that's where I would have gone first is go find the other Chicago investors and just get in that network because I think that would have been a much better protection. You certainly would have found out sooner, right? You could have still had somebody break in, but your listing agent screwed you on that one. I don't know how they messed that up. But yeah, you got to have some local boots on the ground. You don't pay.
It can be rough out there. At the end of the day, I'm glad I did it, learned a lot. It was an expensive lesson, but these days I've got the right PMs in place, got the right
Yep.
properties, have the systems, but it was
Yeah.
like in your experience, there were several times where I said, man, I'm lighting my retirement money on fire. Why am I doing
Yeah.
this?
Why am I doing this? Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, I guess the other things to talk about is if you own enough real estate long enough, you're eventually going to have insurance claims. So
Mhm.
I think we've had three, maybe four. Uh, one, two, three. We had four. We've had three fires and one water damage. I remember the very first time we had owned properties for probably 15 years, no insurance claims, zero. And then like in the span of 7 months, I think we had two. But that first phone call, I remember my guy's Brad. Brad calls me and he goes, "Hey, you know that duplex you have on College?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, it's not there anymore." I mean, what do you mean it's not there anymore? Well, apparently some homeless guy started a fire underneath the carport. The carport caught the tree caught the house. News is everybody got out, everybody's fine. No loss of life, no loss of pets, even no, all that, all good. But yeah, they couldn't put it out, and I'm staring at a smoldering, you know, charcoal. And of course, I'm 15 years in. I've never had to do this, so I had no idea what to do. And all I could think about is, oh my God, this is going to be my life for the next year. That's what I was envisioning. Right. I've had insurance. I always pay insurance. I have umbrellas. I have all this. My vision is, oh my God, I'm going to have to battle with insurance for a year. This is going to suck. How can I do this? I have to go to Europe tomorrow, this, that, the other thing. So this is what's going on in my head. So I pull out my insurance, which I think at this point was Farmers, I think. And I call the 1-800 number or 188 or whatever the number is. I give them my um, uh, account number. I tell them what's going on. And again, you got to remember, I'm 3 hours away. So I have no direct knowledge. So they, in about 10 minutes, they give me a number, right? A case number or whatever they call that.
Yep.
And then they get Brad's number and, they go out, they get a fire report or a police report or whatever that was. And lo and behold, that was the only conversation I had with insurance. And I had a check for full replacement cost. I think I want to say it was 15 days. It might have been 21 days, but I was shocked at how streamlined and easy it was. Now my guy Brad had to do a lot of work and go there and take pictures but again, I was in a different country. So insurance is good. And I always get full replacement cost. Some people only go up to the balance of the loan. I want the full asset. That's what I bought. So yeah, I would tell you if you have the right insurance, don't worry about it. If you got to file a claim, that's what it's there for. And it's a pretty streamlined process. I was shocked. I thought it would be a lot harder than it actually was.
When insurance works best is actually those really large catastrophic claims where it's a very clear cause and effect. Fire.
Yeah.
These policies used to be called fire policies. Like if you think about the State Farm logo, and it has those three bubbles, the first bubble used to be fire
Mm.
because that's what insurance originally was. It's really what it only covered. And so when a property catches on fire, it's pretty cut and dried. Like, yeah, it burned down, you're covered, and they're gonna issue you a preliminary
Yep.
settlement. And then when the actual work gets done, they'll true up to what it actually was if it was over. So I'm glad you had that experience, and that's what it's supposed to be. Where I
Yeah.
think things get tricky, people.
Yeah. Just another thing on that, because again, one of the things you have to do if this ever happened to you is you have to decide if you want to rebuild or not, because you don't have to rebuild, right? This happened to be a property that I think we owned free and clear. So we in this case, and it's the really weird thing was I don't remember what we paid, but I think we paid like I'm gonna say 100 grand for it, something like that, 90 grand. But we insured it for full replacement cost. And I think we had insurance like 256 or some big number like that. And this was during 2010, 11, right? When prices were really depressed. But we got the full 256. And then what we did is I think we spent like 5 grand scraping the lot. And then we sold the lot for 40 grand.
Mhm.
Right. So, every other claim we rebuilt, but that one, given the environment, we took the check and flipped the land.
You're bringing up an important point, which is that the amount that an investor paid to buy the property may be a lot less than what they need to buy for insurance, or it may be a lot more. So I'll give you two
Correct.
cop. You were on the end where let's use a number like $200 a square foot as a round number.
Sure.
You can rebuild most properties in the US for $200 a square foot. And
Hmm.
so if you have 1,000 foot property, regardless of how much the land under it is worth, it's going to cost about $200,000 to replace it. And so if you had $250,000 in coverage, you needed that to be able to rebuild the house in
Correct.
theory, but you might have only purchased the property for $90,000 and
Exactly.
$40,000 of that was land.
Yep.
And so flips, so when you're looking at those numbers, we have cases where folks come in and they'll say, you're telling me that you only want to insure this property for $500,000, but I just bought it for $900,000. And then we explain, you bought it for $900,000 because the land
Right.
is worth 500,000 because you're in a downtown area where real estate's expensive, but the actual structure, if you just took a bulldozer and flattened it and then tried to
Yep.
rebuild it, the actual structure is only going to cost you $500,000 to rebuild. So therefore, you only need to buy $500,000 worth of coverage, even though you paid $900,000 for the property. And so that's an important distinction that can help folks save quite a bit of money because otherwise they're just over insuring. Like, what's the point in buying 1.2 million in coverage on a property
Hmm.
if it's only going to cost you $800,000 to rebuild it?
Yeah. These are all the things that people, if they're working with steadily, these are the conversations you need to have and really dial in what coverage, what amount, that they need. I think those are very important conversations to have because you need some planning. I I always tell people to insure for full replacement cost, whether it's above or below purchase price. And I'm so glad I did because when I bought these, I could have significantly underinsured it. Right. The lender would have been like, all I got to do is take care of my mortgage. And, then I would have been SOL. But yeah, I always replace. I remember talking to my insurance broker going, we're going to insure this for this. We bought so many, like 350,000 bucks. He's like, what'd you buy this one for? I'm like 75 grand. There's like 2010, 11, 12. It was like that all the time. We would insure it for three something and we buy it for 75. It was a wild time.
It was an absolutely wild time. And I'm glad that you're buying replacement costs, not this other confusingly named thing called actual cash value.
Yeah.
We'll
So
talk
to
about
define that
this.
for the audience. Yeah. Just
We'll talk
real,
about this next time, but real quick,
but,
if you have a 20-year-old roof,
mhm.
what's the replacement cost of that roof? 15, $20,000.
Yep.
But what's the value of that roof? What's the
Mm.
actual cash value? It's a 20-year-old roof.
Yeah. Much
Maybe
less.
like it was $20,000 when you got it installed, but now it's depreciated over the last 20 years.
Right.
It's got 2 or 3 years left on it. It's worth maybe $2 or $3,000.
Exactly.
And so if you buy an actual cash value policy, yeah, you're going to save 20%. But when you get your settlement for it, they're going to
Yeah.
write you a check for $3,000 because it's the depreciated value, which
So well
is why
said.
buying replacement costs the way that you do is the much safer way to go because then you're getting the cost to rebuild.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, the other thing I think a lot of people should do now that Steadly's a relationship with one rental at a time is I think all of my audience should evaluate the coverage that they have now. And again, a lot of my audience, that's not what they do. So I assume they could reach out to Steadily and kind of share their policies coverage and can get some advice. I assume that's something they could do. Is that true?
We call it the apples to apples. So side by side, just your deck page of what you currently have, your declarations page,
Mhm.
against the type of production you want to have, and then just say, are you good to go?
Yeah.
Or are there some gaps?
Yeah. The other thing I highly recommend people doing is if they can, looking at their what their current coverage is and what they're paying for it. Because again, I don't know if people realize this, but you can cancel insurance if steadily is cheaper, right? So you'll get a refund for whatever is not used. So I think a lot of people should look at their deck pages, have that conversation, get a quote, and just see. Again, we've been doing this now. I think this is our third conversation. About 40 or 50% of the folks that reach out to Steadily are getting cheaper rates. And hopefully not only cheaper rates, but better coverage that matches their needs. So I'm really thankful that Steadily and yourself wanted to be a part of the channel. You wanted to help people. Where should they go if they want to initiate this apple to apples comparison?
Steadily.com, type in your address, and in about 60 to 90 seconds, you'll have your quote.
There you go. And folks, put in the ORAT. It asks for that somewhere. I forget where.
We'll put it in the show notes so you can go
Mhm.
directly there and get
Get the
the credit for being part of the community.
There you go. All right, Darren. Thank you very much, man. Have fun. Take care.
Good talking.